Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session of Donuts in Demand. My name is Kelly Cheng, and I am the head of marketing at Goldcast. Before we get started and we bring out our special guest out on the stage, I wanted to go through some housekeeping items. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available on demand later this afternoon. We'll notify you over email as soon as it's ready. So if you do have to step away at any point, so around the 30-minute mark, you can easily jump back in later this evening or afternoon and pick up right where you left off. We want to make this event super community-centric, so I encourage you to share anything that's on your mind. Feel free to use the chat feature that's directly to the right here. You can send GIFs, emojis, messages, and also don't miss out on the Q&A tab. That's a great way to engage with our guests today by asking questions directly. And we are also giving away 10 little stationary pen holders. So to win one of these little 360 turning stationary holders, all you have to do is engage with the event today. So send some chat messages, engage with our polls. We've got 3 today, so engage with the polls that we'll be launching throughout the session, and then also ask a question. So after you do all those things, you will be entered to win one of these giveaways. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nicolette Konkol, the Global Head of Demand Generation at Moringstar. Hey, Nicolette, welcome.
Hey, Kelly, thanks for having me.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good.
Good. I see that you're in an office. Where are you located?
We're in downtown Chicago, right in the heart of the loop off of Washington and State.
Awesome. I can see there's actually somebody in the audience that's also in Chicago. That's great. Nicolette, today we are on Donuts in Demand. Were you able to grab yourself a donut today?
You know, I opted not to because I'm not riding the sugar roller coaster, as it were, as of late. But I did get myself a gorgeous almond milk latte that will keep my energy boosted for the afternoon. So if I had to choose, though, I would say, like, if I was indulging, it would probably be a classic old-fashioned glazed donut. I'm not much for like all of the crazy candies and the sugars that go on donuts these days.
Yes. I during lunchtime took a little drive and went through the Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru, and I picked myself up something I haven't seen before. Maybe it's because we're coming into May, but it's a churro donut.
Oh, that sounds nice. That's not too far of a departure from like a classic glazed.
Yeah. So we were kind of on the same wavelength. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. Audience, for our first segment always at Donuts in Demand is Sprinkles of Demand, where we ask our guests to share a few bite-sized tips for demand generation success. Before we go into this, I have a very cute little video to play. Cool. So Nicolette, what sprinkles of demand generation wisdom are you able to share with us today?
So this is so hard for me to distill. I feel like I've got almost 20 years of experience, and so there's lots of things that I've picked up along the years. But there's a few things that really stand out to me that I often tell my team. And one of the things that I think is important to start with is like it's okay to start with the basics. Like go back to basics. What are the fundamentals? And asking yourself some of those fundamental questions when you start out in creating a campaign. Who is your target audience? Where do they hang out? Why should they care? If you can't answer those questions at the onset of creating a brief for a campaign, you're going to be in trouble when you move to execution. So making sure that you have really solid answers and really clear on who your target audience is and where you best find them. Because oftentimes, especially if you're breaking into new markets, they're not going to be in your email database. So where are they? How can you connect with that audience and make sure that there's a message that will resonate on that channel? So I think the fundamentals are still relevant and still important. Further to the fundamentals, I think the next thing I would emphasize is experiment. experiment, 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 right? The work of campaigning is never done. The customer expectation is always evolving. So, the idea of the channel that may have worked for your target audience previously may not be the same channel that works today. What got you there might not get you to the next level, those types of things. So it's really important to hypothesize really well, define the hypotheses, and then, work in a controlled environment to experiment and understand what's working and what's not working for your audience. And I think it's especially meaningful when you're spinning up new channels or engaging new audiences. So yeah, a lot of fundamental, I guess, advice. And the other thing is, I think so many marketers today really just want to deliver an amazing client experience, and that's really important. You want to be placing valuable content, valuable insight, things that are going to be helpful for your target audience, so that they'll continue to come back to you for advice, and you can be that trusted advisor. But also, don't be afraid to play the game a little bit, right? Marketing is a game about winning attention. So really, how are you building the experience to break through the noise and to capture your audience's attention, as opposed to them doom scrolling through LinkedIn? How do you do that pattern interrupt when you're coming together with a creative design or a message going into a particular channel? I really love kind of some of the gamification opportunities that demand generation can belie for marketers, relative to, like, it's not just about having content on a page or having a downloaded asset. Like, you can do both at the same time. You can basically take that, all the content that's in that PDF, put it on the page, attract traffic from an SEO perspective, and still give your audience that option to download that PDF, because something about human behavior means that they think they're going to read it later. They're probably not going to read it later, but they think they will. And that gets you the conversion, right? So it's really important to deliver high value client experiences, but don't be afraid to play the game.
I love that. It's almost like, even if they don't read it, they showed the intent. And that's the important part, where you want to capture that intent so you can follow up and have that conversation. But I love those fundamentals. I really resonated with the first one, because actually earlier today I was working on building a new campaign, working on building a brief, a one-pager, and it feels so mundane and like just nothing sexy or flashy when I'm typing, okay, objective, target audience. But it's so important because it aligns the entire program, because a lot of the times we're not marketing teams of one, we work with different cross-functional teams that also need to understand how this campaign started, who's like the target audience. Maybe your designers need to understand what the target audience is, so they can craft the campaign look and feel best for that persona. So I love that, back to the fundamentals, making sure that whenever you create a new campaign, that you start, you don't cut the corners. This is important work to always maintain aligned and streamlined with all of your stakeholders.
Yeah, it's so true in an enterprise environment in particular. So when you're trying to galvanize not only your kind of central marketing team, people that you might work with more on a day-to-day basis, but also trying to engage decentralized businesses and people that are focused on product. And that's how we're built at Moringstar. And so this idea that you have not only a document that is a source of truth that people can go to, but there is an element of that repetition, because you're circulating the document. It can't just live in the document. You have to make sure that you're having that conversation with the various marketers that you're engaging with all the time, and that you're delivering that same message.
Yep, that consistency is so key. Thank you for sharing. That's those little sprinkles of demand. I'm going to be opening our very first poll here. So audience, you may see a notification pop up on your left-hand side. Go ahead and click on that button, go to polls tab, and answer the first poll. I want to understand what your top goals for demand generation are for this year. So moving on to our next segment, which is called That's Sweet. So welcome to That Suite. This is our delicious creative segment here at Donuts in Demand, and this is where we dive into the creativity behind the ads, the brilliance behind the branding, the visuals that really catch your eyes, and you really get your attention. So Nicolette, can you tell us about one of your favorite campaigns? I know that you have some slides. Do you want me to pull them up?
Yeah, you can pull them up. So I'm actually going to give you an example of a campaign that I did at a previous employer. Shout out to Showpad. Specifically wanted to highlight this campaign because I think it speaks to how you galvanize the entire employee base to amplify your message. We've got, I think, a lot of really great Morningstar campaign examples, but this is one that was really unique in that it was a specific point in time around COVID when basically everything went remote. The state of work changed fundamentally, and so that presented an opportunity for Showpad where previously field sales teams basically were used to a lot of FaceTime and delivering a better buyer experience through that interaction and that relationship, and all of that changed and they had to go remote. And so this presented a really good opportunity. So not only did we have like a compelling event, we also had a primo opportunity because we knew that this challenge was affecting our target audience. And we were able to capitalize on that in a really timely way. And so what we did was we basically created a toolkit using our own product to help sellers upskill and figure out how they can still deliver a really high quality buying experience to engage with buyers in a meaningful way when you weren't able to engage with them in person. And so, one of the things that I think was really unique about this was that not only was it an outbound campaign that we were promoting content on third-party channels, but we were also giving our audience firsthand experience with the product. I think product-led growth is such a hot topic and has been for a couple of years now. But this was one of the first things. I think one of the first major ways that Showpad at the time was experimenting with that. The other thing that made this campaign really interesting is this idea of, hey, we've got a compelling event, we've got a very clear challenge that is affecting our target audience, but then we also had a mandate from our founders. Those three things are a perfect recipe to galvanize your entire employee base to promote the message that you want to go to market with. And so not only were we promoting through typical channels, email and paid ads and this kind of thing, but we actually had our own employees and our own internal subject matter experts developing content and putting that out on social channels, and then we were able to boost that content. And so if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see some examples of the, I'm jumping ahead. Some examples of the creative to come. But essentially this is, thank you. So this was, our sales enablement manager, our chief revenue officer, our founders got into the mix themselves. And so we were basically putting together different content streams for social, for webinars, for our own digital properties. And through the lens of having kind of this, I guess, hub and spoke model of content, we were able to create these content constellations that all pointed back to a central hub. I think oftentimes folks develop campaigns with this idea of, I'm going to promote this white paper. And then it's like, okay, I'm done promoting that white paper. But the question is, what do you want people to do after you promote that white paper? What's the next thing they should do? So in this case, we had our employees, this was back in the day when LinkedIn takeovers were a thing, back in 2019, 2020. I don't know if anyone remembers when that was kind of a thing with LinkedIn, but basically taking our own employees, creating those content streams, and then everyone pointing back to that central resource hub. And so that went for LinkedIn takeovers, that went for more traditional channels like our webinars that our co-founders hosted with our partners who graciously donated or shared their content with us as a partner marketing play. We were doing, LinkedIn blogs, basically everyone in the company was involved in the promotion for this particular series. And so if you go back one slide, you can see where all of these various content streams were pointing towards, which is the remote selling resource hub, right? And so this was the crux of what we were offering to our audience. It's like, the way you do your job has changed. Let's give you a couple tools, completely free. We don't require a login. I think we only required an email address actually at the onset of this, and then they were able to get into the product. They were able to access the videos that, again, were our partner in marketing here, Winning by Design, supplied those, and they were able to basically go through the courses as we've designed them so that they could upscale from a remote selling perspective. So again, this is one of those campaigns where you want to deliver a really amazing client experience, deliver something that's valuable to them at a particular point in time. In this case, we were able to capitalize on the crisis of the pandemic, and ultimately that meant we could continue to build that position as a trusted advisor. And from there, there was more content that they could engage with, so after they had exhausted the remote selling resource hub, there were a number of different assets that already existed on our website. And the other reason I wanted to call this campaign out particular is because this is a long-term SEO play as well. Now, the remote selling resource hub no longer exists, but all of the content that went to promote that does still exist. So you can still, experience those content streams on LinkedIn. You can still go and see the webinar that was recorded. And remote selling is foundational to the way that the industry does business, especially in tech. There were some industries that maybe it was more disruptive in terms of moving remote, but like remote selling is always now relevant. And so these assets still exist. They're still paying off from the SEO juice that's pointing back to the website. And so the long-term benefit for the company is there.
Awesome. I love this campaign. The part where you talk about galvanizing the entire employee base to promote, that is something that I definitely resonate with. We've been trying to do this at Goldcast ourselves, just getting our employee more advocacy, getting it kind of just like all over the feed, like you said, like a LinkedIn takeover. Definitely the algorithm has changed, making it more challenging to do this type of work. But I sort of love the creativity and like the sort of the growth aspect behind all of this. Can you tell me a little bit about the assets here? So many great assets. How did this all happen? Did you have a really large team to be able to help create all these assets?
No, not at all. And, I'm sure the team has grown since I had worked there, but, what you see here in terms of like the video where Emily Fitzpatrick is recording herself, we'd already gone remote by then. So she's taking a Zoom video of herself, and then we sent that over to our design team. And I think at the time we had 2 designers based in Belgium, 1 creative director based in Chicago, and a web developer. And so that was the powerhouse team that was doing all of the design work on these assets as people were recording their Zooms and submitting them. The design team was coming back with the different iterations of a template, or coming together with like the creative that was going for social posts that you see here in this purple. So it was definitely a much smaller team in terms of developing those resources. But again, when you're leveraging those internal experts and you're creating some of those design templates, it makes it a lot easier to scale, and then also to get things out the door quickly.
Yep, totally. And it's also a great opportunity to repurpose content too. If you have like one really long form that's an evergreen piece of asset, you can kind of chop it up and put it all over social. So I love sort of that long form asset that you have over on the left hand side. Thank you for sharing this example. I think so many times we see these polished, marketing campaigns out in the wild, and we just don't know the level of effort and the team behind it. So having you kind of explain just how small the team was that was able to put together something that was so thoughtful, that kind of worked with the product. It's a very, very smart, thought through campaign. So thank you for sharing this with us. And it all starts with, the objective and, going back to the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I will, caveat, it's not that often in an industry where you have kind of this lightning strike event, right? And that you're able to capitalize it and mobilize your teams so clearly. So, the challenge I think for marketers today is how do you create that compelling event that you can align your entire marketing team around and other internal experts so that you can deliver some kind of experience at scale like that. And so I don't think that it requires, massive teams in order to get that done. But what it does require is really tight alignment. And that's hard.
Yes, that is hard. Speaking of alignment, I do have a question from our audience here. Jamie's asking, did you incentivize internal participation at Showcut? How did you get people to share? That's something that I struggle with. I feel like with people's personal accounts, I can't force people to post.
Yeah, no, we couldn't force people to post, but one of the things that was useful to us is that we already had internal experts that were engaging in those conversations, right? So we sold to a sales audience. Our CRO was more than happy to do some videos that we could then leverage at scale. Same thing from our sales enablement manager. So they were already, engaging in those client conversations. So what, small jump for them to just record themselves on video. We gave them a little bit of scripting, but we by no means did we script them end to end. And so they were very, some people are just naturally, of that mindset, and where other people maybe don't want to be on video, and so maybe a social post is okay. But in this, or written social post is what I mean. But in this case, we had some employees that were willing to kind of take the leap that weren't in marketing, and kind of lead the way. But we gave people lots of different options to engage. Like you could reshare, one of the blogs that the founders wrote. You could reshare one of the videos that someone else had internally recorded, or you could just, go on to our social intranet and basically select posts that you could put out on LinkedIn. So that we gave them a lot of different options, but we did not incentivize that participation. I will say there are other areas where we had incentivized participation, different initiatives, different programs, like relative to getting our customer success, for instance, to ask clients proactively for G2 reviews, for instance. That would be an area where you could easily incentivize a CS to make sure that they're asking every time that they engage a client, right? But in the case of this campaign, no, we didn't incentivize. It was just kind of a rallying cry, really, from the founders. And so it was kudos to them that they were able to mobilize the employee base so quickly.
Great. Final question for me before we move on to the next segment. In terms of impact, can you tell me how this campaign resonated with your audience? Were there certain metrics or feedback that highlighted the success?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, with COVID, I think it was a hard year for everyone, right? Because when there's uncertainty, all of a sudden budgets get locked down, right? People are not buying anymore. What's happening? So really, the long-term play here was keep our existing audience engaged and start to expand our audience set, and that was really largely done through partner marketing. So working with Winning by Design and kind of getting access in many ways to their audiences that they had built up. And so that meant just expanding, the world that you were engaging in particular, and keeping them engaged until there was an opportunity to buy. And so in many ways, all of the typical metrics like pipeline build and revenue targets were much longer in terms of the payoff on that campaign, but we definitely saw a huge boost of engagement. And you might attribute some of that to the fact that we had a captive audience. People were at home on their computers all the time, right? But I'd like to think that we were actually delivering the value, which then subsequently drew the engagement, and then the payoff came a little bit later. There was a little bit more lag, but all the same metrics apply in terms of pipeline and revenue.
That's great. Thank you. All right, so we're going to be moving into our next segment, which is called Bringing in the Dough. Okay, so as we sift through strategies that not only created buzz, but also brought ROI back to the business, this segment is all about that payoff. So what Nicolette just talked about, that, those metrics that, pipeline and all that, the revenue attribution that ties our marketing efforts back to those tangible results. So Nicolette, let's dive into, one of your recent campaigns. Can you describe a campaign and tell us about the attribution behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll explain it in maybe a little bit different way, because I did just give you a campaign example, and the initial engagement metrics being the most significant driver there, and then the payoff being a little bit more of a lagging indicator. So relative to attribution, the story at Morningstar, I think, is such an interesting one, because Morningstar, I think, has largely grown in one of two ways: either organically due to really good product market fit, and also through an enterprise sales motion. And so the way that marketers were marketing at Morningstar historically weren't necessarily always with the viewpoint to create pipeline and revenue. And so the evolution of coming into Morningstar and building out a demand generation organization really meant that we had to shift the organization towards those metrics. And so now we are in a position that we can start to measure that pipeline and that revenue contribution. But that is not the end all be all, right? Because even if you can remedially measure pipeline contribution or ACV, what you really want to get after is, where do I put my next dollar to make more impact, right? And that's a level deeper than just hey, this campaign generated a lead that then became an opportunity. Like, if every marketing attribution conversation was that simple, like, everyone would have solved attribution already, right? It's much more complex than that, because we know that the buying journey happens a lot sooner, earlier on, before that person even becomes a lead, before they even become known to the marketer or the sales organization. And there's a lot of touch points even in the sales organization. So from an attribution standpoint, I mean, I think it's always going to be imperative to make sure that you're aligned with sales on your goals. And that's what gives you a more successful full funnel experience. That marketing's putting things in the top of the funnel, and that sales can continue that conversation and have relevant context all the way through to the sales cycle. So having that alignment around pipeline and revenue contribution is really, really important. But ultimately, I find that too many folks kind of devolve into this idea of, well, marketing did this much and sales did that much, and we kind of devolve into silos around, this is how much I contributed, and either you are doing your part or you're not doing your part. But ultimately, at the end of the day, is the question you have to ask yourself is, do you have sufficient pipeline, no matter the source, so that sales can hit their target, right? Because if sales doesn't hit their target, the business isn't growing. And then, does it really matter how much marketing is contributing, right? If the business isn't growing, you're DOA. And so from an attribution standpoint, it is definitely a complex problem. I think having a true north that's aligned to sales is important, relative to pipeline and ACV contribution. But it's better for marketers at this point to zoom out. Like, don't worry necessarily about, like, I drove 50% or I drove 2%, but the value of the attribution conversation, assuming that you are driving sufficient, marketing air cover, is that you're answering the question, where should I place the next dollar so that I can drive more impact for the organization? And then if it's coming from sales, if it's coming from marketing, ultimately, if the business is driving towards a collective pipeline goal that's going to help them reach their revenue targets, so much the better, right? Because then sales is going to feel like you've got their back, we're in it together, and we're getting after it, as opposed to something that's a little bit more divisive, right? And so if that next marketing dollar is spent on pipeline acceleration, because that's what's going to help you hit your ACV target, sales is going to value that. And it's not to say that they don't value things that are creating net new leads at the top of the funnel. They are, but you have to really understand how you get after the data that's going to help you answer that question around, where do I place the next dollar so that I maximize the impact for the organization at large. Because again, if marketing's hitting their goals, but sales isn't hitting their goals, nobody's winning.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I love how you, the way that you frame it is it's more like we're all on the same team, even though it's marketing marketing and sales. It's not marketing versus sales. So I think that's important to go into it with that mindset, or else you're always going to be defensive of your numbers and rather than collaborative with the numbers. I'm curious in your experience, and maybe currently at Morningstar, what kinds of actually there was a question in the Q&A. What kinds of tools or skills, other than that alignment piece, having those real conversations? Any tools or skills that you think are key to making sure that you're doing attribution well?
My head of marketing ops would be probably shouting to me, UTM usage, appropriate UTM usage. So, making sure that you are collecting the data so that you can have those informed decisions is really, really important. The trouble with a lot of attribution is that, no matter how, to what extent an attribution system might attempt to automate that, there's still humans involved. There's still a lot of human error. That's, the potential for human error. And so, the best thing that you can do is make sure that the process around creating the data and capturing that data is really airtight. So before you go down the path of like trying to get a new tool, make sure your process is there. And in this case, make sure the UTMs are being appropriately cataloged.
I'm also really big on UTMs, always use UTMs. Great, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on attribution. I do want to move into our final segment before we go into questions from the audience here. So our final segment is about donut dedications. So every episode of Donuts in Demand, we end with donut dedications. And Nicolette, I'd love for you to give 2 donut dedications today. The first one to an individual in the B2B marketing / demand gen space who has inspired you. And number 2, a brand that has inspired, that you admire for their marketing strategies across a variety of channels.
Yeah. So in the first one, I thought long and hard about who in the B2B space is actually inspiring me today. And, I honestly think that there aren't enough female voices when it comes to influencers, creators, people that are putting their own viewpoints and content out on things like LinkedIn. And so there's plenty of people that I can think of that offer their hot takes all the time, but there's not enough female voices there. So I really just want to say that I really appreciate for those women that are, out there offering their viewpoints. I think Leslie Barrett is a really good one to call out someone specifically. Not only is she really good at her profession, focused on customer marketing, but she's incredibly authentic and she brings her whole self to the channel. I think that's one of those things that's really engaging beyond just like respecting someone as a professional. But yeah, this is I guess a shout out and maybe even my own advice to myself is like, we need more female voices when it comes to content creation and amplifying, best practices for demand generation.
Awesome. We love Leslie Barrett. I think she's an incredible customer marketer. We've had her on many Goldcast webinars in the past. She's amazing. So I definitely channel that as well. What about your second donut dedication?
Yes, from a brand that I admire. I work with a lot of different vendors, but no vendor has engaged me as much as 6th has. And not only engaged me from like a more collaborative partner perspective, like being a strategic thought partner as a customer, but also like their ability to build community and connect other customers into a larger conversation. I just really respect, particularly their ability to build community.
Awesome. I do really love the 6th like community experiences. All of their events are so well done. I think they do a CMO retreat that I would love to attend one day. But I completely agree with you. I think 6th does an incredible job with community. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We're going to head into our Q&A session now. So if you do have questions for Nicolette, feel free to ask your questions. You can also upvote questions, so then we can cover the most upvoted questions first. All right, so I'm going to be sharing questions to the stage, Nicolette, and then you can shout out with your answers. Right. So first question is from Jillian. What common pitfalls should marketers avoid when crafting their demand generation plans?
I mean, I think the thing that I've seen throughout my career is that there's a propensity for marketers and maybe even other executives to view their product as applicable for everyone, right? Everyone needs to know about what we do because we can drive value for so many people. And the thing that I would offer there is that don't be afraid of tight segmentation. Don't be afraid of defining an ideal customer profile, because an ideal customer profile is not everyone in existence. It is essentially answering the question: when X audience does X thing with our product, we win 99% of the time, right? And that's how you start to develop your marketing and demand generation plans. When you have a really tight profile and you're providing really, really good value to that profile, and then you start to expand from there in terms of going into new audiences or new markets with new use cases. But I think no one size fits all marketing, and do not be afraid of tight ideal customer profile definitions.
Right. I think one thing that I've noticed a lot in pitfalls for demand generation is like bringing your product into it way too early. I think as marketers, we love our products, but there's a time and place for it. And I think the right time to introduce your product based off of that intent is super important. Maybe your first date is not where you bring out your product. So that's something that I've seen a lot recently. Just keeping your product more top secret to those valuable leads versus like the ones that are not too familiar with you yet.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that is definitely something that happens from time to time, where marketers will like have someone download an ebook and then send that lead to sales immediately, and then someone's getting a sales call 5 seconds later off that ebook, and it was like, not the greatest client experience. They were still learning.
Yes, and that all also comes down to alignment, making sure you're talking to your sales team on how to follow up. All right, next question we got from Reagan. Do you collaborate with a product marketing team to enable you with the right product messaging for your campaigns? Any pro tips on what has worked for you in that kind of collaboration with teams as a marketer?
Yes, actually, we collaborate with many product marketing teams. So we have, I think I mentioned before, a distributed business where we kind of have like what I would call internally a revenue as a service model, where the demand gen team sits centrally, and then we engage in all of the different product lines, and the product marketers exist inside of the product lines. And so they're really close to the product managers and chief product officers, et cetera, for that particular product line. And so it's almost like being a consultant sometimes, because you're engaging in a particular business and saying, okay, this is the target audience, and this is the strategic message, and that looks very different from this other business part of the business that we're engaging in over here. So in some cases, it'll be like a strategy that is much more oriented towards account-based marketing, because you're engaging very, very large customer accounts and you're trying to get wider within the account, versus a more traditional demand, volume model that's a lot of leads and more transactional in nature. But all that, suffice it to say, is yes, I engage with many product marketers on a regular basis. And, I think the things that have helped us, it's been a lot of iteration on a process. So it's not necessarily airtight, but I think a really solid RACI is important. I think a collaborative spirit, certainly, shared goals, and a really good strategic brief.
Great. Thank you. Next question we've got is from Chaitra. How do you stay updated with the latest trends in tech and demand gen?
I've always got my feelers out. I really like the communities that 𝐀𝐶 has built, because that allows me to tap into other marketing leaders and hear, even what's going on in different industries and different company sizes. And, sometimes tactics apply in financial services and in enterprise that we wouldn't have normally thought of. Like right now, we're doing an experiment with Reddit. So excited to see what that looks like. But yeah, tapping into the communities is really important. I also I'm a mentor on ShareBird, so I not only share my viewpoint, but I also digest the other marketers' viewpoints that are being shared in some of those Ask Me Anythings. I'm also a member of Exit 5, which is another community built by Dave Gerhardt. So I tap into a lot of different areas, podcasts, I think where I can find those little pockets of time, like in my commute, where I can read a blog or listen to a podcast, that's my opportunity for upskilling. And so, yeah, it's often done on the fly.
Awesome. Yeah, I think communities are great. And lately I've been spending a lot of time on LinkedIn, just reading people's people almost have like mini blogs as their status updates now that usually have a lot of good gems in. Definitely a lot of voices on LinkedIn that makes it hard to kind of filter through. But I've been spending a lot of time on LinkedIn seeing what people's point of views are, because people are experimenting with different things and finding different successes. All right, we've got our last question today before we end. Are you leveraging AI in your demand gen strategy?
Yes, we are. Largely, it is through the lens of how do we make our teams more productive.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily always going to be outward facing, but there's lots of really good use cases of writing a really great prompt for an AI bot that if you are XYZ target audience, like how do we find watering holes that they exist in? What other third-party sites are they participating in? Those types of things. So there's lots of use cases out there like that, and I think the best thing that we can do is upskill our teams to create the art of the prompt, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
The art of the prompt is almost as significant as the art of the hypothesis when you're trying to run experiments. And so a really well developed prompt, I think, has the opportunity to make your teams more productive and like shortcut some of the more time-consuming aspects of demand gen planning and strategy. And then, there's obviously the other use cases, like how do you write a crappy first draft of your whatever email or something that you're writing, and then use a human to actually edit it and refine it. Again, it's that shortcut to productivity.
That's great. Yeah, I've definitely found myself, using some of these use cases to help, because we have a lean team, and so I do have to do a lot in my day, and AI has definitely helped a lot. And I completely agree with you. The prompting bit, I've heard from a lot of marketers just not sure how to prompt, and so thinking through, how we can make it super easy for marketers to build their own prompts and make it so that the outcome is exactly what they want, or as close as possible to what they want. Nicolette, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great, 45-minute conversation. Where can our audience connect with you and find you and continue the conversation?
I am on LinkedIn, usually as a lurker, not as a poster, but I'm going to work on that. But yeah, on LinkedIn, happy to connect with folks that are interested in continuing the conversation.
Great. Thanks again for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, but your experience, in demand generation, it has been, awesome, and sharing that wealth of wisdom with us. We've dropped your LinkedIn into the chat here, so if anybody wants to connect with Nicolette, feel free to head over there. But thanks again for joining us, and thanks, audience, for joining us today and for the great questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Bye now.
Take care.